I know we were supposed to start on at 6:40, but you know what? This man right here in front of me showed up early,
I'm already here.
and boy, am I glad he showed up. Mr. Lin Brehmer,
Hi, James. How are you?
welcome to New Trier. I know the studio isn't like the cleanest, but
No, this studio has some serious funk to it, and that's what you want in a studio. This reminds me of many studios I've been in my lifetime, and I always look forward to having a chance to come back for the WNTH Radiothon. I think I've been on the last 3 or 4 years with one person or another.
yeah, I can actually remember the freshman radiothon.
Uh-huh.
I think it was Becca Weiner. She's your goddaughter, right? Am I saying that right, or is that?
Let's say yes. She's not actually, but
Okay.
I'm so close to that family that she might as well be my goddaughter.
All right.
Mostly what she is a major influence on my life.
Yeah, because what I remember is we had a donator who I think donated turntables.
Yeah, that's right. It was somebody who had worked at WXRT in the past and heard us begging for turntable. He decided, hey, I've got a couple turntables. I'm going to give them to WNTH. And I think that was also a year then when you guys were collecting vinyl and people donated vinyl
Yeah.
to the radio station.
Yeah, because after we finish tonight and we start school back on Wednesday, because Thursdays or Tuesdays like an early dismissal kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
On Wednesday, we are actually starting to log our vinyl, so that way we can actually find a way to get rid of them. Because we since this place is going to be torn down at the end of this year, we are moving our station, but
Are you going to get rid of the vinyl? Because I'll take
we're
whatever you don't want.
we're gonna keep some ones that are like important. We have like a record of the week that we keep outside, and that's always fun to have a little laughs while we look at it.
Yeah. It's not easy moving record albums. In fact, the last time when I moved to Chicago from upstate New York, when I first got a job at WXRT in 1984, that's before there were CDs. So my whole music collection consisted of record albums. And when I moved here, I rented a U-Haul or something like that, and there were 70 boxes of records. I don't want to even count up how many records that means, but probably too many.
Yeah, if there was to be like a favorite record, what would be a favorite of yours?
Well, people always talk about desert island discs, and if you were stranded on a desert island. In the world of jazz, I would probably want to have the landmark Miles Davis album, Kind of Blue, or maybe Shh in a Silent Way. Rock and roll albums, I like to cheat and go for a double album. From the early 70s, I might take the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street, because that's still an album that I can put the needle down on if I'm listening to vinyl or CD and listen to the entire album all the way through without, wanting to skip ahead.
Of course.
I don't really like this song.
Skip.
And I've been thinking a lot about the Joshua Tree recently, because U2 is going on tour to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the release of the Joshua Tree. And that was a big album for me in the late 1980s. From the late 70s, punk era, maybe Tom Verlaine's debut television album with the 10-minute song Marquee Moon. But I do have a lot of favorites, and that's, and I guess that makes sense doing what I do, since my whole career, my whole life, everything has been directed towards listening to music and sharing music with people and forcing them to hear things that I think they wanted them to hear that very often they didn't want to hear. So yeah, it's really been my life.
All right. So let's get started with these questions. So one that first on the personal side, like where did you where were you born? Like what made you come to Chicago and all that?
I'm actually a native New Yorker, which I never tell anybody, because nobody in Chicago wants to hear about a New Yorker, right?
I don't mind.
I keep that quiet, and very often when people ask me that, I just make something up. I say I was born on the north side of Chicago, over by Southport and Irving Park Road. My dad was a copper. I used to go to Cub games and flip up the seats to get a free voucher for a ticket. But I actually grew up in Queens, in New York City, and one of the features of living where I did at that time was there was a place called, well, it's still there, the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium. I was in a neighborhood called Forest Hills, and that is where the U.S. Open of tennis was held. It was like the Wrigley Field of tennis stadiums.
Yeah.
And it lasted, I forget when they built the big Arthur Ashe, Flushing Meadow empire. Yeah, I mean, that's where they have the U.S. Open now. But the great thing about the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium was they not only had the U.S. Open there, going back, I don't know, 90 years or something, but they also had concerts there. So in 1964, the Beatles played the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium.
Awesome.
I was not there. I would have been too young. But I remember police officers being on every street corner, and it was kind of a quiet residential neighborhood in Queens, and thinking, wow, why are there so many police around? What's going on? But a lot of legendary rock concerts happened at that place, and since it was open air, very often you could go with some friends and just sit on the grass outside the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium
And hear
the music that was emanating from inside. So that I actually sat outside when Simon and Garfunkel, who were born and raised in Forest Hills, they did their farewell concert at the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in 1970, and I happened to be sitting outside listening to them sing, Bridge Over Troubled Water and Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. And one of the most memorable concerts of my entire life took place at the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, and that was The Who in 1971. And they were doing new songs from a forthcoming album called Who's Next, which became one of the most famous rock albums of all time, with Won't Get Fooled Again, Behind Blue Eyes, and Going Mobile. And so the first time I ever heard Won't Get Fooled Again was actually live on stage, because the album hadn't come out yet. It was coming out in a couple of weeks. And the thing I remember was the first time that I'd been to a concert where a synthesizer was used on stage. So the beginning of Won't Get Fooled Again has that kind of synthesizer fill, and I'm looking at the stage, and I turn to my friends, and I'm flipping out. I'm going, nobody's playing an instrument. Where is that music coming from? And it was a synthesizer that started the song off, Won't Get Fooled Again.
That's
so
hilarious.
a lot of the big concerts of my early life happened right in my neighborhood. And then when I got a little older, I remember I went to the legendary Fillmore East one time. I think that was 1969. So I grew up in New York City. I played a lot of Little League baseball, played a lot of Pony League baseball, played a lot of high school baseball. I wound up going to high school in Manhattan, commuting every day on the E or the F train from 75th Avenue in Queens, and taking that into the 7th Avenue stop in Manhattan, switching to the D or B, and getting off at 59th Street Columbus Circle. And if you're saying 59th Street Columbus Circle, that means nothing to me. If you've ever seen the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in the movie Ghostbusters, the circle that he approaches, stomping on taxi cabs, is Columbus Circle, 4 blocks from where I went to high school.
Oh my goodness. The thing is, like, you see that movie and you think, just keep your mind blank, and then of course you think of one thing. It's like the biggest nightmare.
I think that's one of the flaws in the movie is
exactly
they say, empty your mind, whatever you're thinking of, and it's already too late. You've already thought of something, and they blame poor Dan Aykroyd for the Marshmallow Man stomping New York City. So I grew up in New York. I was when I was a little kid, I was a Yankees fan, but I had some friends. It was a family of 5 brothers, and I used to play variations of baseball with them every day, and they were from Oak Park, Illinois. So every day we would pretend to be either the Yankees or the Chicago Cubs. So when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I had this complete appreciation and affection for a team that was from Chicago. Because, it would be my turn, and I'd be the Chicago Cubs, and it would, I'm Don Kessinger, Glenn Beckert, I'm Billy Williams and Ron Santo and Ernie Banks, and I'm Don Young, And so that was really the birth of my interest in the Cubs. So when I moved here in 1984 to work behind the scenes at WXRT as a music director. And when I looked for an apartment to live in, I found an apartment that was 5 blocks from Wrigley Field. And it kind of pickled my brain, the idea that I was that close to a major league ballpark, that I was that close to a major league ballpark of a team that I'd kind of followed from afar for many, many years. And those were great years, the mid-late 80s in Chicago, both from a musical standpoint and from the idea that I could walk down the street and go see the Cubs play. In fact, I was at the Cubs convention broadcasting live this afternoon. And, yeah, I'm into the Cubs in a pretty deep way these days, as most of the city is.
Yeah.
Half the city is.
But, like, I guess during the game in November on the 2nd, did you stay up to watch the whole thing, or did you have to go in the next morning
that's a
for
good
work?
point. Had I been a true professional disc jockey, I would have said, okay, what is it, the 8th inning? I've got to go to bed. But it's an interesting question because I was with a group of people who, many of whom had season tickets next to mine, old friends. We'd gotten season tickets at the same time in 1989. And we were either at the ballpark for the home postseason games or we gathered at somebody's house to watch them together. It was like my Cub family. And 7th game of the World Series, it's getting late. There's not a chance I'm going to go to bed before the game ends. There's no way. If I have to have 4 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep, 2 hours of sleep, it doesn't matter. I'm going to watch the end of the Cub game. But then the rain came, and they said there's going to be a rain delay, and I'm thinking, it's approaching midnight. There's going to be a rain delay. How long is a rain delay? It's got to be, I've never heard of a rain delay being less than like an hour. So I turned to all my friends and my family, who they were all with me, and I say, I love you all, but I got to go home and watch the end of the game at home so I can go right to bed because it's getting insanely late. And I'm driving home, and they say, hey, they're taking the tarp off the field. They're going to be back playing baseball. I'm like, oh, my God. So I wound up watching the final outs at home.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the radio show the next day, although it was very celebratory.
Of course.
I think I was blind tired.
Yeah.
I'd been up really late. And I didn't go right to bed. I'm sorry. You start talking about the Cubs of 2016, and look what happens. I start getting all choked up.
Yeah. Because I tell you, when I had interviewed Len Kasper 2 weeks after, I specifically asked him, like, where were you during the game? He said, like, oh, I was just, like, hearing this from a bunch of my friends. They were texting me. My phone was, like, here, as if my phone is, like, here now. And he had to do it in celebration. But then the next day, you still kind of thought it was, like, a dream of some sort. Like, I still get, like, the shivers over it because I'm such a diehard Cubs fan. Like, my first game that I went to was actually between the Yankees and the Cubs because my dad's a Yankees fan.
Really?
Yeah. He was born in New Jersey, so he's been a Yankees fan for his whole life. And at least he can say one thing is happy for him with 27 World Series championships.
Yeah. He's got nothing to complain about.
But, like, the first game, and I can still remember it, like, the final score, of course. I can't remember what happened in the game and everything, but it was 5-3 Yankees, and it was my first game. We were sitting probably back by, like, not near the third base side, about 20 or 30 rows up. And
so were you in the terrace? It sounds like you were in aisle. Yeah. Sounds like you were in aisle 213.
About that, yeah. And I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old. And I was
wow,
like,
you were pretty young.
Yeah, and it's crazy remembering it about 12, 13 years ago and still having it in my mind.
I still remember my first game, too, and it was at Yankee Stadium. It was against the Cleveland Indians. And the funny thing is, my description of it over the years are an absolute copy of a scene, I think it was City Slickers, where somebody asked, what was your best day ever? And Billy Crystal tells the story I went to my first baseball game at Yankee Stadium, and I walked in, and the field was so green because you only had black and white television back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that there was any patch of land anywhere in New York that could be that green surprised you. But he described the whole game, Yankees, Cleveland Indians, and it was exactly the experience I had. Yankees, Cleveland Indians, being blown away by how green the field was. And baseball's been a pretty big part of my life.
Like I say, every stadium that I've been to, where have I been? I've been to Toronto. I've been to Chicago, both of them, of course. And every time you still get the feeling that like it's like you've been to a game for the first time in your life, because you see different things at stadiums on different days.
There's something magical about the whole experience.
Like when I talked with Len about the like broadcasting, like what you have to do, I told him, I said, you really can't have a carbon copy game that's cliche. Everything changes within the game. It's not going to be just normal, I don't know, 5-4 game every single day you watch. It's going to be a shutout game, or it's going to be a walk-off winner or something like that. You can never get an exact replica.
And even though there are variables, and you think you can predict it, like the wind's blowing out, the wind's out of the south, so there are going to be a lot of home runs. That's a game that's 1-0. And we interviewed Joe Madden and Ryan Sandberg today, and one of the things we talked about was, you have to achieve a certain faith that for every really bad thing that happens, a really good thing's going to happen. Because especially in the postseason this year with the Cubs, I mean, there were so many moments when you were like, oh my God,
they're gonna blow
I can't believe this is happening. And then a little while longer, oh my God, Montero just hit a grand slam home run in the 8th inning.
Like for me, it wasn't until like game 4 when they lost, and it was 2-1. Then they made it 3-1 in game 5, and then or in game 4. Yeah, and then they won it in game 5 to make it 3-2. I was like, okay, this could actually still be happening. I have a friend that I ran with. His name is Charlie Perlman. He goes to Duke right now, and he had a sign that said Cubs in 7 on the night of game 5 when they won. And he's like, we're taking this to Cleveland and we're going to win. And then I thought, okay, he's got a point.
Well, what I said when they were down 3-1 in the World Series, I said, if the Cubs were going to lose the World Series, they would have been up 3-1.
Yeah, it would have been like what the Golden State Warriors were to the Cavs.
Exactly, or the Marlins were to the Cubs. So,
that brings back nightmares.
Yeah, it really does. But, I mean, this postseason was absolutely exhausting. I mean, all of my October, right into the beginning of November, was just lost to the Cubs. I couldn't concentrate on anything else. I couldn't think about anything else. People say, hey, you're coming to this concert? I'm going, no. The Cubs are playing tonight. I've got to see it, or I've got to be there.
Yeah, definitely. Like I also mentioned this with Len as well, and that was he said he kind of knew, like, going into the regular season, like when they started 25-6, you kind of knew that they were gonna roll through the Central and get as far as they did. But I said this, that they didn't win like controllably in the postseason. They had to come back from the downfalls that they had.
Yeah, it was like almost every series, they were fighting back from adversity, and you had to have faith in them. You couldn't turn away from the team. You just had to believe that somehow they were going to pull through. I can't. You were just saying that right after the game, and Len Kasper saying, the next day, it was hard to believe that it actually happened.
Like I made it certain that I went to the parade on that Friday, so much so that I told my math teacher I'm going to take the math test the day before just to go to the parade. No, I did. Best part, got an A on the test.
You want to hear my best part of the Cubs parade?
I'm all ears. Go ahead.
I got to ride in it. on the top of one of the buses with my news anchor, Mary Dixon. I don't know how we made that list. We didn't ask any questions. We just said, yes, we would like to ride on a bus ahead of the Chicago Cubs and drive down Michigan Avenue in front of millions of people and wave. We were on the bus actually with the broadcast teams. We were on the bus with Ron Coomer and Pat Hughes and Len Kasper and Jim DeShays.
Yikes! I want to say I'd have to go back because I was at the parade. I was at right at Wacker and Michigan. Right at that bridge. I know you wouldn't have seen me. It was hard. It was hard being in a swarm of blue, probably. Or I was
you were the guy singing "Go Cubs Go." I remember,
along with the millions of others.
Yeah.
But of course, I did film it, so I'd probably have to go back and look.
Well, I'm easy to pick out because I'm wearing that ridiculous Cubs Argyle sports jacket that I was wearing when I walked into the studio today.
I like that. That looks very spiffy. I like it.
Yeah, I stole the idea from Joel Murray, the actor.
Yeah.
And he had the full suit. I said, I asked him, where did you get that? Because he and I both host the Hot Stove Cool Music Benefit at the Metro every year. I said, where'd you get that? And it's a website you go to and you order a sports jacket. Now for very special occasions, I'll wear the Cubs Argyle sports jacket, and people will go blind.
I might actually try to find a way to get one of those things, because that's like one thing that I noticed. Then this is what Joe Madden did one time after like a season or a series where they like didn't do that well. It was the travel day, and they had all the like crazy. That was funny to watch. I still watch that to this day, and I'm like, who came up with that idea?
Yeah, they were wearing footy pajamas. They had a lot of fun. I wouldn't mind being on that team, except for the whole not being able to play at a level that would be appropriate for Major League Baseball. But other than that, I would love to be on that team.
Of course. Yeah, all right. Switching from the Cubs, obviously, because we did get carried away.
You have questions all set up, and I start talking about the history of baseball. That's what I do for a living. I talk about things randomly.
Yeah, but adding to that, I was gonna mention like something along with Lin's Bin. What goes into preparing that time slot for it, for the Lin's Bin that you do at 7:15 Monday and Wednesday?
Let me explain what it is. Lin's Bin is a feature that we do on XRT, and it airs Mondays and Fridays at 7:15 in the morning, and then on Monday it re-airs in the evening at 6:30, Friday, whatever the Friday morning one, re-airs at 6:30. And it really starts as a radio essay where I'm answering a question from a listener. And so I write this essay and then embellish it with music that makes sense with what I'm talking about, either thematically or sonically. And then I include movie clips or quotations or, great speeches from history. It depends what the question is.
Of course.
And it's really a labor of love because it takes a very long time. But it is the single most mentioned feature of the XRT Morning Show. Wherever I go, wherever I am, if people are familiar with the station and familiar with XRT, they know Lin's Bin and they tune in for it. And if they miss it, they make sure they listen at 6:30. So it takes me hours to write it.
Of course.
I write a script, and then I send my audio track to the guy that first started producing it in 2002. My producer back then was Pete Crozier, and he moved to Columbus, Ohio. And when he moved there, he really understood my musical taste, my cultural taste. He was like a director with the final cut. So that I knew that I could send him a script, I could send him my voice, and he could put the music and the movie and the TV cuts all behind it, and I knew that he would make the best choices. For example, if I said, I want to use this line from Casablanca, the movie, if he couldn't find that, it's a bad example because you can find lines from Casablanca, but if he can't find some obscure reference I'm making that I want as an audio clip in the piece, he can find something better. So it's a collaboration between the two of us, and it's a long-distance collaboration.
So he does this from Columbus and then sends it back to you here in Illinois.
So what happens is Monday I pick a question, and And then I go, I should really start on this. And then I go, no, I'm really hungry. I should get something to eat. And then I come back and I say, I'm really tired. I should go home, take a nap. So then I don't do anything on Monday. And then Tuesday, I feel the pressure building behind me and saying, okay, you've really got to write something and you've got to get it done, because Wednesday, you've got to voice it, because you got to give him time to put everything behind it and get it back to you Thursday night. And then Thursday, wherever I am in the evening, if I'm at a sporting event or a concert, I'll get an email on my phone saying, sent the bin to your home email. I go, oh no, okay, I gotta listen to this. So I get one chance to listen to it Thursday night, and then I say either post it, which means send it back, or I say, you know what, this part's a little too long, take this out. So sometimes there's slight changes to it. And then it goes to my producer, Chris Swake, who's my morning show producer currently, and he makes sure it's in the system and ready to go Friday morning. Meanwhile, Wednesday I've had to pick a Lin's Bin topic for the next Monday, and then Thursday I'm trying to write that because Friday I don't want to get behind the 8 ball and realize, okay, you've written nothing, and it's Friday. You should be eating oysters on the half shell at one of your favorite restaurants and getting ready to go home, rather than spending the early part of the afternoon finishing up Lin's Bin and having to voice it.
Of course.
So it's a long and arduous process, but I'm really happy when it's done.
Yeah.
When I'm working on it, sometimes they're easy if they're anecdotal. Some of them are, I reminisce about the family trip to Florida, which was a 2-parter where I talked about my brothers and me, and we're in the back of an old station wagon, and there are pillows and blankets back there. And, 3 brothers in the back of a station wagon, that time in history. You were free to roam. There were no seat belts. So you pretty much tortured each other, either physically or the best was psychologically. We used to pretend my littlest brothers, your little brother always gets a hard time because your head is too big for your body when you're little. So if you have older brothers, they're going to make fun of the size of your head. So we would tell my littlest brother in the car on the road to Florida that his giant head was expanding, and we would pantomime, put our hands around his head like it was backing us up. But we do it so quietly, our parents didn't know that we were driving our brother crazy. And at a certain point, he would say, Mom, the boys are teasing me, and they wouldn't hear anything in the front seat, right? And they go, you guys keep it down, man. We don't hear anything. You keep it. And my brother David and I would have our faces pressed up against the glass of the car, and we'd be whispering at each other, his giant expanding head, it's crushing us. And he really didn't like that. That was psychological torture.
That sent him off.
Yeah. So sometimes it's stories about my childhood. Sometimes there's stories about baseball. Sometimes it's answering a question I have no right answering. One of my favorites was, can you explain string theory? And I don't know very much about particle physics, certainly not as much as you or anybody else in the world. And I had to do just enough research about subatomic particles that I could turn it into something entertaining. And that was kind of a challenge, because who can make subatomic particles interesting?
That's funny. Now, going with XRT, you work with Mary Dixon, as you mentioned, from the broadcast. What is she like as a partner? Best friend?
Mary Dixon, we've worked together on and off for close to quarter of a century, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she left and came back. She left and came back. She left and came back. She tried to escape my evil clutches, but she really couldn't do it. So Mary is really extended family for me, and she's usually the smartest one in the room, whatever room you walk into. And it's great to have somebody like that covering the news, because the news is very complicated.
Right.
And people are very touchy about the news.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets it right each and every day. She knows what's going on. She's not just, taking a piece of paper from some news service and reading whatever they printed. She writes her own news each and every morning, does all those newscasts, And she's also very tough. You do not want to mess with Mary Dixon. She can be very fierce. And my favorite thing is when somebody calls up and wants to complain about something she reported or something she said. They have no idea what they're walking into. They're walking into a tiger's cage. So somebody calls up and I pick up the phone in the studio and I say, XRT, yeah, I got something I want to tell Mary Dixon. She's completely wrong. I just go, hold, please. Put the guy on hold and go, oh, Mary, there's some fresh meat on line 1. And I can almost hear the weeping of the guy who called her to try to correct her on something I know she had right.
Wow, it goes that far.
So Mary and I have spent a lot of time together, both working and personally. Her husband is a former writer for the Chicago Tribune. He's written a great book about cuisine, and I've spent a lot of time with Mary and Mark and their daughters, and it's some of my favorite time I've spent in Chicago.
Of course, yeah. So,
and that's not usual. You don't usually work with somebody on the radio
right,
and then hang out after you're off the radio. More often than not, it's a professional relationship, and you're in, you're out. You see each other when you're working. But the entire staff of XRT, a lot of those people have been there for decades. So it's a lot more than just a casual, so-and-so's coming up on the air after me. These are people I've known for lifetimes.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. As for my show, it's more of a sports show, as obviously this is the Sports Hour. But
cool.
I do like to add a little bit of variety. And I guess what advice would you give to a variety guy like yourself, or to me or any of the DJs out here that are on the board? What's probably the best, 3-4 things of advice that you'd give?
Okay, the first and most important thing, and it took me years and years to understand this, is that if you make a mistake on the air, either you get a name wrong or you flub a line or you miss a segue, you have to move on from that as fast as possible. You cannot for a second dwell on the mistakes you've made.
Right.
For one, most people listening to the radio listen very casually. So most of the time you think you've made a glaring mistake on the air. Nobody's even noticed.
Mm-hmm. It just goes past as if it's
stop
not.
worrying about yourself. Nobody's paying attention to you that much anyway. And the other thing, just for your focus, is it's really a detriment to worry about things you've done when all you should be worrying about is things you can do.
Right.
The other thing is, just like in any sport, in any activity you can think of, it's about repetition. It's about reps. It's about doing this as much as you possibly can. I know at the beginning of my radio career, I inched into it. I had one show a week for a while, but I volunteered to work on every holiday. I volunteered for every overnight shift just so I could get used to the idea of talking into a microphone.
Right.
And it takes a long time to reach a level of comfort. You seem to already have it. You seem to be very comfortable in front of a microphone. That's nothing you take for granted. That's something that takes a long time. And it took me a long time. I'm very comfortable in a studio like this, talking to somebody, talking into a microphone. I do not like being on stage in front of people.
You and I, we should chat that over coffee.
Yeah, because it's a totally different thing, and
because you're in front of people, it's a
different dynamic.
Stage fright.
Yeah, so I do it all the time. It's part of my job, going on stage and making stage announcements before the Grateful Dead play at Soldier Field or something like that, and nobody would know that I'm nervous, except that I'm telling them right now. But it's something I hate to do. And I think it's true with a lot of DJs that the whole mindset is, I'm comfortable in a glorified closet.
Yeah, and they also have to get it
nobody
perfect.
Looking at me, and I can talk all day long. But say, hey, would you go out and say a few words on stage? You're like, okay, I can do that. I don't got a problem with that.
Yeah, you say it in the nervous voice, and then you go out and you're like, can't speak, and then you just straight out can't speak.
No, you can speak. You can.
Barely.
You got to push through it. It's just something you got to get used to doing. I'm not sure I have any other advice. Oh, you know what? People were going to tell you that you shouldn't get into radio. There's no future in radio. But here's the deal. I meet so many kids these days, kids in high school and kids in college that are doing high school and college radio, that are really invested in the experience. And somebody was just hired on the Score that I think used to work at the WNTH many years ago. There's still people getting into radio, making a living doing radio, making a good living in many cases doing radio. It's just tough because you start out and you make no money when you're starting out. But even if there is no radio in the future, the ability to talk into a microphone and make sense is something you might find yourself doing if you're working for an insurance company or you're working at a bank. You're always going to be able to talk to people in a public setting, and radio can be a great preparation for that.
Yeah.
So I always feel like, people talk about the utilitarian aspect of education. You should major in economics or you should study statistics. Whatever you do in your life, you have to be able to read and you have to be able to write. And the people, no matter what field of expertise they choose to pursue, the people that can write and read are going to have an advantage over people who can't.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because I sometimes do like streaming. Because I see like we all kind of have an idea that TV's dying, but like just how like people said radio's died as well.
You mean traditional TV?
Yeah,
because people can get it
like,
on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Like all of these like the app services like ESPN, Fox.
Right.
I don't know, something else or whatever it's called. I forget. But yeah, that you definitely bring up a great point. And actually, the college that I want to go to, I'm not going to make the decision yet. It'll come probably in a couple of days. But they have a radio program, and I've already talked with their business guy, and he said that they're just go to the radio, the journalist guy, and email him about what to do. So getting your name out, that's what it is.
College radio is really the only experience I had before I got my first job in commercial radio. And of course, in those days, it was so much fun because there was so much experimentation. And, FM radio itself as a money-making proposition was still in its infancy at the time that I was doing college radio and starting in commercial radio. But I've had a great time. I mean, the number of really cool things that I've been able to do because of the career I chose is hard to pack into a radio program to talk about.
Of course.
I mean, the bands I've seen, the cultural events I've been to, it's really been great, especially here in Chicago.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with what you've just said over the course of this long 40 minutes, but I can say that it has been a very well productive 40 minutes. So
good.
Thank you, Lin. I appreciate it. So let's end the recording. And, of course, we are going to need you to just say one last thing, saying this is your name, and you're listening to Radiothon, so if you wouldn't mind.
I don't mind at all. This is Lin Brehmer, and you're listening to the WNTH Radiothon. Support your local high school radio station, or I'll come looking for you.
Let's not go that far. And, of course, this is the Sports Hour. We've gone for a full 40 minutes, and I'd have to say, Lin, that was very productive, as you are everyone's best friend in the whole wide world.
Thank you, James.
We definitely agree with that. So, thank you all for listening to this. we are going to move it on back to the 24-hour playlist. We can see an interview going on in the back behind us in our new recording studio, which will come next year. But yeah, let's just move on to some music because let's face it, both of us need to catch our breath.
You got it.
Thanks, Lin.
Thanks, James.